The next guest is Dr. Niki Elliott. She is a clinical professor and director of the Center for Embodied Equity and Neurodiversity at the University of San Diego. Dr. Elliott is a leading voice in neurodiversity and trauma-informed education, and she has trained thousands of educators and parents worldwide to better support children with learning differences, mental health diagnoses, and trauma histories, as well as behavioral challenges. Her trainings consistently lead to measurable improvements in school climate, reductions in suspensions for students of color, and increased well-being among children, parents, and educators. Her forthcoming book, Heart-Centered Connection, 7 Essential Skills for Helping Neurodiverse and Marginalized Children Thrive, which is coming out as this is being released, is based on decades of research with over 1,000 child-serving professionals and brings in clear guidance and a hopeful message when compassion and trust come first. Real learning can begin. Well, welcome to the podcast, Niki.
Thank you so much, Dana. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So I wanted to start off with the question I ask everyone. Tell me about a time you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
A time that I was in the trenches, I would say my first year of teaching. I taught 4th grade in Teaneck, New Jersey, which is a suburb right outside of New York City, Manhattan. And that was during a time where veteran teachers were able to cherry pick the students that they preferred and to kind of offload, so to speak, other children to the newer teachers. And so when on my first year of teaching, my class was heavily loaded with students that were very bright, very capable, but for different reasons had significant behavioral and emotional challenges that prevented the world from seeing what they were capable of. And there was one particular student, I can say his name because I'm still a part of the family over 34 years later, Gregory Washington, was a particularly challenging case. And the day I was in the trenches was the day that he pushed me, he physically pushed me into the edge of a sharp computer table. And I'll save the story of the behavior, the situation that led to the behavior. But I went home that night with a gash on my thigh. And I literally went and prayed, Dana, and I said, okay, God, either he has to go or I have to go, because working with this type of behavior is not something that I was cut out for. And I prayed about it. And it's almost like I heard in my dream, neither of you go, work it out. And when I had that kind of, there's nothing else I can call it, but a spiritual conviction that he wasn't going anywhere and I wasn't going anywhere. And the crawling out of the trenches was understanding who he was, what the source of those behavior was, what the source of the behavior was. But most importantly, I crawled out of the trenches by choosing to see him from a different light, build a relationship with Gregory, built a relationship with his parents and his family that I still have to this day. And that crawling out of the trenches through that relationship first led to a transformation in his behavior and set the stage for my teaching career to this day.
Yeah, so that's awesome to hear. Like, even though it was something that was difficult at the time, that's what built the foundation ultimately. So had that not happened, we don't know where you would have ended up.
Right? I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't been put on a trajectory of building a record of success with students that others find most challenging. We literally would not be here today. It shaped my career and my passion.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about how you got to your current position as a director for the Center for Embodied Equity and Neurodiversity at the University of San Diego. Talk to me a little bit about after you taught 4th grade and where it went from there.
So after teaching elementary school, I came back home to California and pursued my doctorate degree in education. So again, my trajectory started moving from that first year with Gregory toward understanding what kind of alternate learning environments or schools or education practices could best support children who identified or would be identified as neurodiverse, whether they had a formal diagnosis or not. Because one thing that I did come to understand is that many children may exhibit symptoms that might be consistent with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, emotional disturbance, but not have an official diagnosis or have the opportunity to be tested. And yet those children deserve to be served at a high level and with compassion. So I went into the looking at the charter school movement actually as part of my doctorate, like what kind of alternative learning environments could be successfully created and set up for children who would be identified as neurodiverse. And so after my doctorate, I actually went in to be the founding board member of a charter school in Altadena called Avison Charter School. There, I got an opportunity to convert a library space into an independent study classroom. And we actually built an independent study program for neurodiverse children within the school, 1st through 5th grade. Part of the class were children who came daily in a multi-age learning environment that was set up to meet their needs. And the other part of the class, the other half of the class, were made up with children whose parents I coached for homeschooling. So they had a hybrid experience where they could learn at home 3 days a week and come to school and learn in community 2 days a week. And so after several years of leading and designing that program, I had an opportunity to bring the methods that I was designing for training teachers and parents in support mind-body approaches. So we brought in yoga, breath work, sensory awareness, a lot of the practices that I refer to in the book. And then I was invited to bring my practices to the University of Laverne, where I founded the Center for Neurodiversity, Learning, and Wellness. And then from there was recruited by my dean to the University of San Diego to build what is now the Center for Embodied Equity and Neurodiversity. So the last 10 years of my career have been directly involved in delivering professional development training for school teachers, aides, counselors to support neurodiverse children within inclusive or general ed environments primarily.
So you've definitely seen in these years of giving the trainings that there are a lot of general education teachers and others who work in classrooms such as paras or people who work in a school building, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, etc., who are not trained at all in inclusion and how to work with students who have the neurodiverse behaviors or who might need extra support. So have you seen any trends towards the positive in these years, or what would you say needs to still be done?
So we absolutely have a tremendous amount of work to be done because presently, even though many schools have philosophies or statements around inclusion, on the ground, it's a much different story. So still in many places, the only people who have specialized training to support behaviors or academic needs would be those who have special education licenses and special training. But even inside of those classrooms, as you mentioned, the paraprofessionals or the aides who end up actually being more in the front line of behavioral support do not have the same training that the teachers have. So there have been several school districts, San Bernardino City Unified, Berryessa Union, schools outside of in San Jose. They have made significant investments over the years to train their paras, their aides, again, people who work as security, campus safety officers. All of these people have a lot of frontline contact with children. And many times without the training, they're co-escalating the children's behavior, sometimes with a lot of old school parenting practices and just general misunderstandings about what's going on with children. In the places where people have invested, again, Pasadena Unified School District invested in having their before and after school program providers trained, because again, that's a place where many parents are told, sorry, your children can't be invited to participate in before and after school because again, our staff isn't trained. And so whether that be summer camp operators, we see consistently higher rates of inclusion and lower rates of expulsionary type discipline when those providers are better able to distinguish intentional behaviors, which is what it often is assumed to be, from the symptoms and needs that are wrapped up inside of a diagnosis that need a different type of compassionate care and support.
So you've also built some trainings for these educators. What are the trainings like? Mm-hmm. Also, in terms of how often these educators would receive training throughout the year?
Yes. So in my role as the director for SEEN at the University of San Diego, our School of Leadership and Education Sciences has a certificate. So it's a 37.5 hour certificate for postgraduates. So actually, it can be for people who have a bachelor's degree, but actually we offer the certificate to anyone who has a child-facing role. So again, people who work for the YMCA, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, people who work for the local museums and science centers that offer education programs, or summer camp operators. It is a hybrid program in its full implementation. It starts off with a 2-day retreat that is based on the principles of the Heart-Centered Connections model. And we have an applied educational neuroscience approach. So in that retreat, we're helping adults really understand the unique functioning of the brains and nervous systems of neurodiverse learners, and helping the educators and the caregivers understand how their own nervous system capacity shows up in service to these children. And then after the 2 full days of retreat, we move into 8 2-hour hybrid Zoom courses that are live, where each course covers one of the 7 pillars of heart-centered connections, which means one of the 7 essential skills that every adult needs to be an agent of inclusion and support for neurodiverse learners. And then the 8th session is a virtual certificate ceremony where those who complete all the requirements of the certificate earn that non-degree professional certificate from the School of Leadership and Education Sciences at USD.
And you say a lot of what's happening with educators who have not been through a training is that they actually escalate the behaviors instead of regulate them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so it's really important. One thing that I have found in my research and in my years of experience in teacher education and adult prep, research shows that helping professionals tend to, on average, have higher ACE scores, or we would say adverse childhood experiences scores. So that is a study that was conducted by the Kaiser Permanente and the CDC to look at exposure to childhood abuse or neglect or household challenges from the age of birth to 18. And so in our work, many times teachers are taught to get the ACE score of children. So we talk a lot about trauma-informed education for children. But as an adult educator, I have come to understand that the adults who serve these children often have higher ACE scores themselves, or the adults themselves are neurodiverse, often undiagnosed or untreated, but can show some of the symptoms of that, or have had adult late-stage diagnoses. And so it's so important that adults understand that if the adult gets easily triggered by a neurodiverse child's behavior, then they have less capacity to stay grounded and to stay settled when a child is having a meltdown or a strong behavior or avoidant behavior. So then the adult raises their voice, then the child gets more upset, and then the adult gets more upset, and the situation spirals. But because the adult has power in that dynamic, they get to issue the discipline or the consequence or the punishment without being asked or required to reflect for themselves, what role did I play in how that interaction went? What role does the physical space have as a nervous system stressor for this child? So those are the questions that we train adults to look at. What was my nervous system state? What's my nervous system capacity to provide support? And how is it possible that this physical environment that I've created is taxing the child's nervous system in a way that makes it challenging for them to settle and to show up with prosocial behaviors?
Yeah, and that's a great point about how so many of them do have these high ACE scores, but when we overlook having them be trained, then we're not best serving our students with adults that are aware of how they can co-regulate instead of escalate. So
absolutely. So that nervous system awareness for adults is the foundation of our work. And consistently, people who have completed the Heart-Centered Connections program consistently say that awareness and building the tools, the mind-body tools, to holistically support nervous system state has been the fundamental game changer in how adults are showing up to support neurodiverse children.
You also do facilitator trainings. Talk to me a little bit about who those are for and how people can access that and how long it would take for those.
So the original level 1 training, which is the practitioner certificate, takes about 16 weeks, so like an academic semester, because we have the retreat and then the courses, the online courses are every 2 weeks. For the facilitator training, that's level 2. So typically school districts who have sent staff members to participate in level 1 or organizations will then choose 1, 2, or 3 of those individuals to invest in them becoming facilitators, which now means that those individuals can go back to their school district, to their agencies or nonprofits, and then become the trainer of the level 1 certificate in their home environment, which is lovely because then they don't have to do the Zoom classes when they're there within a district. They're able to gather and continue all of the PD in person. So we've reached a point in the growth of the work that I'm not able to be the one that delivers all the training anymore. So now we have about 60, by the end of this summer, we will have completed training 60 individuals throughout the state and some across the country who can deliver the Heart-Centered Connections Level 1 practitioner certificate, excuse me.
Yeah, and that's great because that will spread the training out throughout other states and outside of California, and
yes,
hopefully get to other people throughout different districts that need the training. You also are going to be speaking at some conferences, both local but also national conferences in the fall. Let me know which ones you'll be at.
Yes. So on July 23rd, San Bernardino County is having the Wellness Conference at the Disneyland Hotel. I'll be the keynote speaker for that conference. Very much looking forward to that. And then in September, I will be a post-conference workshop facilitator for the Polyvagal Institute's annual conference in Silla, Spain. So I'm very much excited to be joining them there. And then in the meantime, just a number of conference presentations and things within the academic realm. But those are 2 that could be open to the public, and I would love to see any of your listeners at one of those events.
Great. So if people are going to pick up your book, Heart-Centered Connections, 7 Essential Skills for Helping Neurodiverse and Marginalized Children Thrive, what pillar would be the most important that they should read about and learn about in order to implement some of this into their school or their classroom this coming school year?
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about pillar 1, which is self-awareness, meaning that an adult's awareness of their own nervous system stressors, their own bounce back ability and their capacity to hold a settled state while they are supporting children with exceptional needs is critical. We consistently hear people say pillar 1 has been the game changer for them. And I would say second to that would be pillar 3, again, okay, which is neuro-inclusive spaces. So again, so many times when adults are designing classrooms, playrooms, they're designing based on either what makes themselves feel comfortable, they're designing to their own taste, or they're designing to what they have stereotypically been told is an ideal environment for children. But we have an understanding that for many neurodiverse children, extreme sensory sensitivities are a significant part of the profile, and overwhelm from visual stimulation, sound, touch, not enough vestibular activity for balance, spinning around, flipping upside down. We've taken so much physical activity away from children in these hyper-focused learning spaces that when adults are not aware of children's sensory needs and how they are impacted by space, again, they're misinterpreting behaviors that lead to punitive discipline rather than understanding how to adapt and modify physical environments to support sensory safety and soothing. And that becomes a big game changer in creating spaces that register a sense of physical and psychological safety for neurodiverse children. So I would say those two pillars, if you could only walk away with two, could go a long way to changing how we show up for children.
Yeah, and I never thought about that the overwhelm, can cause students negative reactions. And,
Mm-hmm.
if you're learning more about this, maybe be aware instead of having so much, there's, a lot of elementary school classrooms that are just, walls are covered. So, there's something to be said about that. So,
yeah. And it's important to know because for some individuals, they are hypersensitive, which means they get easily overwhelmed and they're sensory avoiding. They need less stimulation, less things on the wall, less, distractions. And then others are experiencing hypoarousal, which means they are sensory seeking. So they need more lights, more stimulation, more music, more opportunities to move. So having that sensory profile for each child helps you understand where they are on that sensory spectrum and making sure that we're given enough that supports both ends of that sensory spectrum.
Well, we've had a great conversation today around your trainings, your book, and your trench story starting out as a first year, fourth grade teacher. Out of everything we've talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Well, I'd like to leave the listener with the thought that really is the impetus for this book and kind of like driving the rest of my career. And that is based on my experience with my son that my family adopted from foster care, and it has a neurodiverse diagnosis and behaviors that in his youth led to him never being able to join Boy Scouts, never being able to participate on a formal sports team, not being able to enjoy summer camp, things that most families take for granted that are going to be a part of a child's upbringing. And over, what we heard was, sorry, no one here was ever trained to quote unquote deal with behaviors like these or with sensitivities or needs like this. And so if it's not your lived experience to be the parent or caregiver of a child who is neurodiverse and where unmet needs lead to strong behaviors, then you don't know what it's like, the amount of isolation and marginalization that families feel. I'd like to leave everyone with the understanding that I've had grandparents say, oh, your book looks good. My grandson is autistic. I'm going to buy a copy for my daughter or my son. I would ask grandparent, buy 2 copies, one for yourself and one for your child who is the parent. Because when grandparents, when aunts, when uncles, when summer camp operators say, I don't know what to do, then that child is missing an experience. They're missing the opportunity to build a relationship. When they can't be included in Sunday school, they're missing opportunities for faith formation. So it's this larger picture of inclusion and care and relationship building that I believe we all owe to our children. And that requires everyone who touches the life of a child to build the skills and awareness that surround the issue of neurodiversity.
Yeah, that's really important to remember. It's not just the special service provider, and like you said, for students to be included in these activities that are part of a typical upbringing. We need to have more people who work with the students be aware of how to best support them. Well, where can people connect with you and find you online?
Thank you so much. So online, I can be reached at my author page is NikiElliott.com. So Niki is Niki, Elliott, Elliott. My company, Mindful Leaders Project, is where we offer wellness retreats and just ongoing support for adults who serve as helping professionals. And then for interest in the certificate, you can find that at the University of San Diego. If you Google Heart-Centered Connections Certificate at USD, then you will easily find the website that has the upcoming dates for our all virtual session, which starts in September, as well as the hybrid session I described that starts in San Diego in October, and we would love to see you there.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much for being my guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was a pleasure having you on, learning more about your book and your work.
Thank you so much for having me, Dana. I appreciate it.